Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. And tonight we are being joined by writer director David Willing. David's movie is called Surrogate and is now streaming on Amazon Prime Video and Google Play, which includes YouTube. David, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you very much for having me on.
And I got to tell you, David, before we get started, I got to give you a big congratulations. The movie is really well done. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The acting, the story was phenomenal, and we're going to break it down. So, a big congratulations to you on a great job. Now,
Thank you very much for saying that.
Surrogate is your first feature film. Uh, Full feature film, sorry. Now, coming from a bunch of shorts, was doing your first feature everything that you'd hoped it would be?
Um, that's interesting. Yeah, I think the thing with feature film is you're aspiring to do that, but it's very hard to get one of those, to get a feature film up and made. So it was exciting, but also it's a very long stretch. We were working on the film for 6 years. And really, when it becomes the most enjoyable is when we're watching it in the cinema with audiences. The
Yeah.
horror audience is really dedicated and hardcore. Uh, the good thing is, when you watch a horror film in an audience, you really see if it's working or not. So that was probably the most exciting bit of it. But up to that point, you realize it's a lot of work.
Absolutely. Now, the story, like I said, is very nicely told. It keeps the viewer engaged throughout the whole film. Your co writer is Beth King. How long did it take you guys to write the script, and were there a lot of rewrites involved?
Yes, there were a lot of rewrites. We spent initially about 2 years writing the first four drafts of the screenplay. So Surrogate came out of a brainstorming session when we were looking at different horror and crime ideas. And but it wasn't full time for 2 years. So
Yeah.
we would meet, do some brainstorming, come up with aspects of the story. Then Beth was writing for television, so she'd get a television gigs. She'd disappear for a couple of months, and then I'd get a directing gig. But it really took about 2 years to get to the fourth draft of the screenplay, and that was when the majority of the story was in place. And then over the next 18 months before shooting, we're reworking and tweaking aspects. But the major rewrites really happened between draft sort of one, two, three, and four. And we played around with different endings on the screenplay.
And we're going to talk about the ending in a little bit. We're not going to give away any spoilers, but a lot of films are inspired by shorts. Was this ever a short story of yours that you decided to make into a full feature film, or it never took that route?
No, it didn't take that route. We were initially we were like, maybe we should do a short horror film, but we went, oh, let's just go straight to a feature idea. And some of the other ideas we did at the same time would have worked better as short films. But this year we went straight into to a feature because we both done shorts and we both had feature films in development that never got made or haven't been made to this point. So it was really about, let's write a feature film that we can make happen.
Nice. Now, the concept of the film, what was your inspiration for you and Beth? It's a paranormal film, but
Mm,
as with any, I mean, paranormal films are very widely done for
yeah.
at least a decade now. I mean, I think if you go back, Paranormal Activity is what really jazzed up that subgenre again. How do you take a genre that's been done so much and give it your own unique twist and spin?
Yeah, I mean, that is the really tough part for filmmaking. I mean, it's almost that every story's been told at this point. It's been a very long time since we've had a new genre. Subgenres pop up, and paranormal really has taken off again. It's a bit like zombie films 15 years ago.
Exactly.
Suddenly everyone was doing zombie. And I mean, the answer to that is, there's expectations within the story. So, um, the trajectory of the genre or the subgenre. And then it's just finding how can you put some original twists
Hmm.
on that idea. And really, that is part of understanding, I said, what the audience is looking for in the genre, and mixing it up a little bit. And it is a tough balance of how you do that. I was talking with a writer the other day that I'm mentoring, and it's like, when you've got an action film, you're going to have a car chase, or you're going to have a foot chase, or you're going to have a fist fight.
Yeah.
And it's the same with paranormal. There's certain things that are going to pop up. It's impossible not to have those elements in there. But we were just like, how can we put a couple of original spins on some aspects of that?
What I definitely notice is the film does not have any of those cheap jump scares. It is still very scary, thrilling throughout the whole ride. Was that just a trope you wanted to avoid, the cheap jump scare just for the scare part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a few parameters at the start of writing the film, and one of them, as I said to Beth, is it's going to be, we need an 85 to 90-minute screenplay, so 85, 90 pages. And that was really just about the story running time and the budget. And the other thing, as we said, is we can't just use jump scares all the way through,
Yeah.
because we're just not fans of that in the horror genre. And it works well, a well placed jump scare works really well in a horror film. I mean, every horror film has them. We just didn't want it to be that. What you're kind of referring to is very common, of like, you just set up jump scare, set
Hmm.
up jump scare, set up jump scare. It's not leading to anything. So there's a couple in there, but they're very deliberately placed for a reason. Yeah.
Now, the main character, Natalie, is played by Kesti Marassi. How would you describe, by the way, she did a brilliant job. How would you describe the character of Natalie?
Yeah, Natalie's it's an interesting one. So the setup in the story is, so she's a single mother. She's working as a nurse, and the key part to her character is that she's a skeptic, and she's very practical and very grounded. And the arc of her character and the evolution of the story is about that skepticism being chipped away, and ultimately it's about how does she protect and save her daughter,
Uh huh.
um, through that struggle. And it's where her character, the realization, the realizations her character has to have on how she can save her daughter.
And we're gonna get back to Natalie in a bit, but I gotta point out Jane Badler. I mean, I've been a fan of Jane going way back to the '80s of the show V. I don't know if you've ever watched that, where she played the evil alien Diana. But I mean, I'm just a huge fan of her. How did Jane come to your attention?
Yeah, I actually hadn't seen V, but I knew its reputation for kind of, eating animal scenes. I think that's the most famous
Yeah, they eat
character
the
moment for
mice
her.
and the
And
rats. Yeah.
I have gone back and watched them subsequently, and they're great moments. They're all iconic TV moments for sci-fi. And she came on board the project with Comfer Gabo was the executive producer on the film, who's an Indonesian businessman based in Melbourne, and he's on the Victorian College of the Arts, which is one of our art schools in Melbourne. He's on the directors board, and so is Jane, because
Uh,
she's now been based in Melbourne for a couple of decades. And he just said to her, I'm producing this film. Would you like to read the screenplay? And she said sure, and she read it and she really liked it. And then I just met her for a coffee in a cafe in Melbourne, and we talked about the story and what I saw with that character. And I thought she'd be a great
oh
fit for
yeah,
that role for a couple of reasons.
she was amazing. It was great to see her again, and I mean, brilliant choice in casting her. Now, her character Lauren, it's sort of like a subtle statement. She works as a child protective services, Department of Home and Family Services, depending on where in the world or part of the U.S. you live in. But anyway, was there sort of an undertone on how the government, with CPS tries to keep children protected, but sometimes they do make mistakes, they come to the wrong conclusions, and ultimately end up causing more harm than good?
Yeah, there was no deliberate kind of intent or statement behind that character. Really, what that was about, and when I was directing Jane, I was saying from her point of view, what she's got, information she's got, and what she's basing things on is a logical conclusion to draw from that. And when we're writing the screenplay, we're very aware that horror works well when you have a grounded antagonist as well,
Exactly. Yeah.
rather than just the monster. And so we sort of saw her as a secondary antagonist character
Hmm.
from particularly Natalie's point of view. And we knew the audience would see it as that. But from Jane's perspective, I mean, what she's kind of assuming is more logical than what's actually going on.
Exactly. Now, one of the scenes that I love the most, the sequence of scenes, is when the little girl Ava is conducting that seance in the house.
Mm.
The cinematography in that sequence was phenomenal. How you shot it with the mirrors and the girl reaching out to the spirit world. Walk us through how you wanted to shoot that sequence. Did it all go according to plan? And were you ultimately happy with how it turned out?
Yeah, to the last question, very happy with how it came out in the final product. I think it's a pretty special scene, and it's had a great audience reaction. Watching that in cinemas, you can just see people just
Yeah,
starting to fold down and hide in their seats. And it was one of the scenes we had a very tight shooting schedule, but it's one scene that we had a whole day to shoot.
nice.
And as you'll know, there's a scene either side of that. They were done on separate days. So the actual seance, we had a whole day, even though it's a 7 minute scene, so it's a lot to shoot in a day. And it was something that I just saw very clearly once we'd come up with the idea and had written it. I saw very clearly how I wanted to direct it, and it's an example where everyone else was just then adding to that what they were bringing. So Ben's cinematography, he came up with a couple of shots. I knew mostly how I wanted to shoot it, but he came up with a couple of really key shots, particularly not wanting to spoil it, but the big kind of push in moment is,
Yeah,
Ava starts
yeah,
convulsing. We'll say, that was his idea, and he also, came up with a few other shots, and it just started to really complement what we're going for. And there's a documentary coming out on the making of the film soon, which we're going to coincide with the Blu-ray release. And
nice.
in that, we look at those moments on. There's a moment when we're on set, we're blocking it a couple of days beforehand, and when I hit onto this idea of which I hadn't envisaged before, but this forced perspective of constantly drawing the audience to look to areas rather than staying objective to the scene.
I mean, it was the cinematography, and let's not forget the sound effects as well. The sound was very important to that scene, and you know what I'm talking about, and how that really just amped up the tension in the viewer putting themselves
Yeah.
into that room. Now, by the end, Natalie realizes that she cannot run away from this entity. Because wherever she goes, wherever her daughter goes, it's going to follow. She was going to have to confront it. Do you think when she makes that decision, is she willing to die or do whatever it takes to protect her daughter?
Um, yeah, I mean, the end's really interesting, and it's a bit hard to get into without sort of spoiling too much. But I like films and Beth as well that have, let's just say, more complicated endings.
Yeah,
When a character really has to go to a place that the audience might not doesn't want them to go, and that character might not have to. Yeah, the question for her character is she tries a lot of things and then realizes that those aren't going to work. So, I mean, you could speculate as to how far she would go to solve that problem, and she goes a long way. Let's just say that much.
you're right. We don't want to spoil it, but I totally understand what you mean. As I was watching the film and the ending, it was more realistic, the approach that you decided to go with. For a lot of entertainment, movie fans, television, it's an ending that never really crosses their path. There's only two options for the viewer: either good
Mm.
wins or evil wins. There's
Mm,
no
yeah.
other choice. But you gave us sort of another choice, one that I did not see coming. When I was watching it, one of the words that came to my mind were this might cause controversy, but it's not the right word. It's not going to cause controversy. It's going to make people think. Did you guys
Mm.
play around with a lot of different alternate endings?
Yeah, we did. We actually that ending we went with, I think, was the fifth one that we came up with,
Hmm.
and it's something I'm looking forward down the track once the film's been out longer and has been seen more widely that we can actually get into a lot more the specifics of that. But I think yeah, the end will and has um, kind of mess with people's heads a bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Some people it's hit them really hard. And from my point of view, Seven is one of my favorite films. Exorcist, which influenced this. I mean, Exorcist is a brutal ending. It's kind of like, is it an up ending or not? He's
he jumps out
what
the
becomes,
window to save.
yeah.
Yeah,
And there's also the inference that if from I believe, and I might be wrong, but I believe from the Catholic perspective, that if you commit suicide, then you're
damn
not
to
going to go
hell.
to
Yeah,
heaven. Yeah, so there's the inference, and there's the possibility at the end that with the other, I can't remember his friend's name, that he sort of does a silent confession by squeezing his hand. The question is that going to be enough, or has he, consigned himself to hell? And so I like those conflicted endings, and they don't work for everyone. I know there's certain audience members that want always want everything to work out very well for the characters, and I liked playing around with that darker area.
but I got to give you credit because you took it even a little beyond Seven, which had a phenomenal ending, and you just
Mm.
mentioned The Exorcist as well. You really, I mean, from a lifelong movie fan, I was like, wow, I did not see that coming. Um, Now, sort of going a little bit before we wrap up, you've spoken about getting funding for independent films. How you've mentioned it just takes longer.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, what do you think the state of independent films are now? I know in the United States, when I speak to people outside of the U.S., there's government funding in a lot of countries outside the U.S. And when I tell them in the United States, that does not exist. There is no government funding for films. What's your feelings on financing in independent films?
I mean, I was going to say it's one of the toughest parts, but there's lots of hard parts. I mean, writing a good screenplay is really difficult, and then funding it is difficult, and then making it a
Yeah,
good film is really difficult. So I think each country industry there's those pros and cons. America, there's not the government funding as such, but there's a lot bigger audience, a lot bigger market, and a lot more money floating around.
yeah,
And with but it's also ultra competitive. And so with the funding bodies in Australia, for example, it the same in terms of the studio system. In terms of, there's a lot of people wanting to make stuff, and only a small percentage getting
exactly.
access to that. And why we wanted to stay fiercely independent with Surrogate is that was more about the speed of making it happen. So the one thing is with government funding bodies is everything moves very slowly,
Yeah,
and and at any point, like with any film, it can still trip up. Like Beth and I both had other films in development, and through those funding bodies that haven't come to fruition. And so, yeah, the downside of that is it just takes a lot longer for that to happen.
yeah.
But raising independent finance is also really difficult because they all come with different problems. It's very often
Oh yeah.
that finance falls through. We were very lucky that Confer Investor was extremely supportive of the production, both creative and practically. But I've had other friends where halfway through a shoot, the investors just pulled their money,
Wow.
um,
Wow.
which is a
That's
tremendous, yeah, which is, I mean, it's horrendous. But that happens a lot with private finance. So
it does. It does.
yeah,
Just one final question. You mentioned earlier that you were sitting in the theater watching this film. Did Surrogate get a limited theater release in Australia?
yes, yeah, we run at a few cinemas in predominantly in my city, Melbourne, Australia, and it was just a very strategic regional release because we didn't want, it's really tough for indie films to find bigger audiences.
Yeah.
So we just focused and did event screenings, and we had a run at a cinema where each time some cast and crew would be there, and we'd have things like Q&As and meet and greets. And yeah, it did really well for local cinema. That here they're actually saying it outsold the Batman at the same time for them, which was really, which is one of our main kind of marketing pieces. That and
Yeah,
someone actually at the premiere at the cinema, which was a kind of a great compliment to the horror aspects.
absolutely. That is great.
But
David, I mean, I got to thank you again for coming on here. And I really got to tell our audience, check out this movie. You're not going to be disappointed. It's available on Amazon Prime Video. It's available on Google Play, which includes YouTube as well. You will not be disappointed. It's a great story, great acting, great cinematography the whole way through. It's a great film. Again, congratulations, David. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
um, yeah, I was going to say thanks for your kind words on the film, and that if your audience look on for other places they'll be able to view it down the track is surrogatefilm.com.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have information on other platforms that it's going to become available over the coming months. So
Nice.
and the other bit is at the cinema screenings, quite a few people came back to watch it again because, as you know, there's lots of intricacies you might not realize first viewing that become relevant second time. So that would be my other thing is watch it twice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that holds true for Surrogate. It holds true for a lot of movies. I
Mm.
want to thank our guest again, writer, director David Willing. The film is called Surrogate. I want to thank our audience, those of you who have tuned in live and those of you who will be watching later on. On behalf of David and myself, wish you all to be safe and stay walking. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much.